Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video. Welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I got a haircut. Now I don't look homeless anymore. Let this be a sign of change and improvement in the channel. Today I'm actually really excited because we're about to make another tier list, this time about Radiohead, which is one of my favorite bands of all time. There's hardly any albums in their discography that I dislike. Most of them for me are masterpieces, so we're not going to be using the lower end of this tier list. But before we get into the actual, rating, I want to say that just because I put an album on the B or C tier, it doesn't mean that I don't like those albums. I actually think quite highly of many albums I put on the B tier because for me, the B tier it's something that represents a good album, but that could have been even better, an album that didn't really reach its full potential. I'm saying this because a lot of people disagreed with my placing on the Coldplay tier list, but honestly, again, this is my opinion. Like, you don't need to agree with it. Actually, disagreeing with me, it's actually something I really enjoy because that means you can make a comment giving your own opinion on the band's discography, and we can have a small conversation in the comment section. Always respectfully, without insulting, without saying mean things. We can have a nice discussion. So go ahead and leave it down below if you dare. With that being said, let's get started with the first album, Pablo Honey. If there is an issue with the Radiohead fan base is how pretentious they tend to be. You know, everything about the band has to be this unique and weird experience. Everything has to be experimental. You can't have just a nice song, and that's pretty much Pablo Honey, a set of nice songs. There's nothing really that special about any of the tracks in Pablo Honey. You have songs like Creep, songs like Anyone Can Play the Guitar, which are not the most adventurous tracks Radiohead has done. So a lot of people seem to believe that because of that this album is automatically bad. I don't think the album's bad at all. Actually, I quite enjoy this album when I revisit it for this video. I can definitely say that I wouldn't listen to this album on a regular basis because when I listen to Thom Yorke, Thom Yorke's voice is so thin and so expressive that I think it works at its best when it's included in these deep themes and backed up by these ambient sounds that you can see in albums like Kid A, OK Computer, or A Moonshade Pool. But still, if you're a fan of alternative rock and you want to listen to a set of nice songs by Radiohead, you should definitely go for this album. There's a lot of filler on this record, I'm gonna say, and you can definitely find a bunch of albums that sound exactly the same. There's nothing that unique about this record, but you can't label an album as good just because it's not fucking weird like a lot of other albums by Radiohead. So definitely I think this album tends to be a little bit overlooked by people who call this entry-level Radiohead, but even though I disagree with that statement, I wouldn't say this album is great either, so I'm gonna put it in the C tier. Now let's go with the next step in the band's evolution. Honestly, this album improves everything Pablo Honey has to offer. The songwriting is way more unique. You can start to see what Radiohead is all about. Even in albums like Moonshade Pool, which is released in 2016, you can see a lot of the same patterns the band started to use here in the bands in 1995, 21 years later. Not only that, but this is also quite a big commercial breakthrough with tracks like Fake Plastic Trees and Just being really, really popular back when it was released, and even popular today, along with tracks like Street Spirit and High and Dry. They managed to add jazz and art rock, and a little bit of progressive rock too onto the mix. The only reason why I think this album is not as good as a lot of people think it is because I feel like the level of quality on this album is a little bit all over the place. You can have a good track like Fake Plastic Trees, but then immediately after that you have a track that is not that good. It's not even remotely as good as the track you just heard, and I think that's a big problem. Also, problem with early Radiohead or 90s Radiohead is the fact that they didn't really care when it comes to connecting the tracks. It seems like every track it's on its own little universe, and you're supposed to enjoy it and then just jump to the next one. And once you listen to albums like Kid A, Amnesiac, and Rainbow's King of Limbs, you can tell that they became way better at connecting the track and making everything more cohesive, and in my opinion they lack a whole bunch of that in this album. So I'm not gonna put this album in the A tier. For me, this is more B tier album because again, like, it's a good listen. You have a lot of good tracks. I think the Thom Yorke's performance in tracks like Fake Plastic Trees with that beautiful falsetto, or the powerful vibrato in tracks like Street Spirit, are really good. I think the guitar work, the arpeggium on Street Spirit again, or the wonderful acoustic guitar on Fake Plastic Trees, along with the synths in the background, works really well. However, I think that again, the space space between the tracks, the fact that the level of quality tends to go up and down a lot, I don't really like that, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. Next up, we have OK Computer. Now, what an amazing record this is. You know, it's kind of hard to do what I'm about to do. But before I do it, let me just explain that for me, this album is the perfect example of what alternative rock should be. It's taking the rock genre and modifying it to fit your own style. You know, that's the reason why this album sounds so unique and so much better than the band's and Pablo Honey. You can tell that Thom Yorke is so comfortable in a lot of these songs. For example, Paranoid Android with that beautiful falsetto and that amazing crescendo at the end. You can tell that his performance is a little bit more aggressive in tracks like Airbag and again Paranoid Android, but also more menacing in tracks like Karma Police, for example. The lyrics are also amazing, representing, you know, the inclusion of technology into our lives and how it constantly, you know, we feel harassed by it a lot of the times, as you see in tracks like No Surprises, where they talk about this in a really beautiful tune, one of the most beautiful Radiohead songs ever. But I think that if one thing shines through in this album is the amazing performance by Thom Yorke in every single track, especially in songs like The Tourist, in my opinion, one of the most majestic tracks Radiohead has ever done, again with the lyrical theme that's just excellent. Tracks like Exit Music for a Film are also great examples of how good Thom Yorke's performance can be. So I know what you're thinking, you know, if I have so many positive things to say about this album, I'm probably going to put it in the S tier, right? The answer is actually no. I'm going to put this album in the A tier, and I'll explain myself why, because I know this is blasphemy for Radiohead fans. A lot of people consider this album to be the greatest album of all time. I do think the album is a little bit overrated. And the reason is, I think that even though the album, you know, it's really good at explaining a concept and representing that concept in the music, I think that the album, again, like the songs have space between them. Like the songs are not properly connected to each other. I feel like the songwriting is a little bit all over the place too, you know, especially with when it comes to the production and, you know, the way Thom Yorke's voice plays out in the tracks. I feel like the guitar work in this album, it's also a little bit all over the place. Not in every song. Again, you have some amazing performances, but in tracks like Electionering, I don't really know how to pronounce that. I don't really like the guitar work on that track, honestly. It's just not for me. So I do feel like the album has quite a few flaws, and these are flaws that other Radiohead albums don't have, like the album I'm about to talk about in a minute. So that's the reason why I'm putting this album in the A tier. But it's an amazing album. Definitely go ahead and listen to this album if you haven't. You probably have, because if you're watching this video, it's because you're a Radiohead fan. But if you haven't, if by any chance you haven't, go ahead and listen to this album, because it's one of the greatest records ever. So yeah, I'm putting in the A tier because I feel like it has a few flaws. But if you take those flaws away, this album is pretty much perfect. Moving on from OK Computer, putting OK Computer at A. It's probably the worst thing I could have ever done, but I stand by it, honestly. If I'm being honest, that's where it goes for me. But you know what album is on the S tier? Kid A. In my opinion, when it comes to quality, when it comes to proficiency, when it comes to skill, when it comes to creativity, when it comes to everything an album should have, Kid A is the best example of Radiohead at their peak. Everything about this album is so interesting, so immersive. You know, you definitely feel like you're in the future. It's been 23 years since the release of Kid A, and it still feels futuristic. It still feels like, you know, we're being engulfed by technology, although it already happened. This album deals with, you know, themes of isolation, paranoia, like in the track Idioty. With everything in its right place, you can tell that this is going to be something completely different. It's almost not a rock album anymore, with the exception of songs like the National Anthem. But even that record doesn't have the regular Thom Yorke vocals. It has some high-pitched, you know, echoed vocals. It sounds so well with the rest of the track and with the rest of the album, and that's the reason why I think this is an S tier Radiohead album, because this album fixes the issue that many of the previous albums had, and it's the space between the tracks. These songs are connected to one another. Every song makes sense inside the album. If you take one song out of the album, it doesn't work anymore. It's almost as if every single piece is a part of a bigger puzzle, of a bigger picture, and that picture is perfect, perfect. I often place this album as one of the greatest albums ever made, because for me it is one of the greatest albums ever made. I think that tracks like Idiotique, Motion Picture Soundtrack, Everything in Its Right Place, How to Disappear Completely, the National Anthem, Morning Bell, all of these songs were so well. And even ambient tracks like Tree Fingers, a track that is extremely simple and it doesn't even have any lyrics or vocals on it, it works really well inside the album. So that's the reason why I think this is an S tier album. It's pretty much the best example of the band at their creative peak, and in my opinion, along with In Rainbows, this is the best album Radiohead has to offer. When I say this, a lot of people think that I'm just a really big fan of this electronic ambience music, and that is true. I really like that genre of music. However, this next album proves that statement wrong, and it's the fact that Amnesiac was released only a year after Kid A. Almost everything in this album comes from Kid A, and personally, even though I really enjoy a fair amount of the tracks in this album, I personally think that this album is incredibly overrated because it has some good again, like Pyramid Song is a great song, Life in a Glass House is a great song, Morning Bell, the Amnesiac version is a good song, I like that. Knives Out is also a track I enjoy. Most of the songs here are pretty acceptable tracks, but the problem is that I feel like these are just Kid A leftovers, and I'm not just saying that because I don't like it as much. I'm saying it because the tracks don't feel as connected, and the whole album doesn't feel as organized as Kid A was, and that is a huge part of the reason why I feel like Kid A is a great album, is because of how the tracks complement each other. In Amnesiac, it's almost like a bunch of experiments thrown out there, like if it works, it works, if it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's not really a good thing, honestly. You can enjoy, you can dislike or dislike the songs in this album, but it's the fact that they don't make sense, like the fact that the album doesn't make sense, the fact that it feels like it's a little bit all over the place, it's an unavoidable fact. Does that mean I think this album is bad? Not really, actually, not at all. I think that the way they mix jazz with this electronic ambience music is really, it's a really good decision. I think it speaks for the band's creativity. You can see that in songs like Life in a Glass House and Dollars and Cents, which are some of the best tracks on the album. You can also find one of the darkest and most gloomy tracks Radiohead has to offer with Pyramid Song, which again, the way that track is built is so interesting, and the pace of the track, the rhythm is so asymmetrical in a good way, and I really like it. But overall, I think that if the tracks don't connect with each other, I just simply can't enjoy this album as much as Kid A. In other words, if I want to listen to an album like this, I would just listen to Kid A. There's no reason for me to go back to an album like this. So I'm just going to put it in the C tier, honestly. I don't think this album is that good, and I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't have a lot to say about it either. Now let's go with Hail to the Thief. This album, it's a bit of a weird one. It's an album that's often overlooked by fans because a lot of people didn't like, when it came out, a lot of people didn't really appreciate the political focus the band had with this album. I think that it's way more relevant now than ever, so I think that may be one of the reasons why people are revisiting this album. I think this album is actually really good, way better than Amnesiac, and I know that's kind of controversial to say that, but I just think the electronic elements in this album work really well because they're more like fully developed in the track. They don't try to make, again, like little pieces of a puzzle. Every single track on this album is a full picture, and while I have praised in the past how every track on Kid A is the piece of a bigger puzzle, I think that sometimes you can also make an album where every track is good on its own, and that's basically what Hail of the Thief is. The starting track is definitely the highlight on this record, 2 + 2 = 5. I don't really have that much to say about this record because I don't really go back to it that much. Actually, I think that's the album I go back to the least out of every single Radiohead album. Not really for any specific reasons. Again, I think it's a good album, but I just feel like everything that sounds similar to Kid A, I just listen to Kid A. It could have easily been an A tier album, but due to the fact that the tracks don't really connect with each other that well, you do have quite a lot of filler. This is almost an hour long, and I don't think it has the quality to, keep the album interesting for a whole hour. That's another reason why I'm putting the album at B tier. But I think this is a B tier album, and I'm comfortable with the album being in the B tier. Now let's go within Rainbows. And I know I said multiple times in this video that Kid A, it's in my opinion the greatest Radiohead album, the one that has the best quality overall, but it's not my favorite because that title belongs to In Rainbows. In my opinion, every single song on In Rainbows, without an exception, is a 10 out of 10. Every track is amazing, from Body Snatchers to 15 Step, Weird Fishes, All I Need, Faust Arp, Jigsaw Falling Into Place, Videotape. All of them are amazing. I think that every track is so different from one another. You have the beautiful, almost a cappella vocals joined with that bass in Nude. It's such a majestic track, and it falls into such an amazing arrangement at the end of the track. Then you had Weird Fishes with that fast-paced drumming, with the beautiful guitar arpeggium and the beautiful vocals by Thom Yorke. All I Need, such a romantic but also dark and gloomy track. I know I said multiple times that I loved how the tracks were connected to each other in Kid A. That doesn't work that well on this album. The tracks are not really connected to each other, but you don't feel the space between the tracks. The album flows so well. It's just everything about this album works really well, and for that reason, I'm gonna put it in the S tier. I couldn't put it anywhere else. This album, in my opinion, is the closest thing they ever did to a perfect record. You know, it's just that if you point a gun at my head and ask me to remove a song from In Rainbows, I couldn't do it. This album is basically perfect, and I love it, so it's gonna go in the S tier. Sadly, the wonderful streak of albums Radiohead had ended by In Rainbows, because now we have the King of Limbs. Now, a lot of people hate this album. A lot of people hate this album. For many fans, this is their worst record, and I can definitely see why. I think they overdid it a little bit with weirdness in this record, because it's meaningless. In every other Radiohead album, every time they try to experiment with something new, it meant something. It had a purpose in the track, and here it just seemed to fill out a space. It's not really that important. Actually, many of the songs in this album, like Bloom, for example, would work way better with a more stripped down instrumental, because the pace at which these drums are played is so fast and so aggressive that it nearly knocks down every other element of the track. And if you want some evidence to this, you can go ahead and watch the live performances from this album being way better than the record itself. You do have a lot of good songs. For example, you have Codex, you have Lotus Flower, which is one of my favorite Radiohead songs. The distortion in that track really works well, but even in these songs, the reason why they're so good is because they don't have that aggressive electronic rhythm strumming constantly and drowning every other element of the instrumental inside this, again, fast-paced drumming that doesn't make any sense. And I think they realized this, because after this album, they took a really long time, 5 years to release the next album, and everything they did after the release of this album, and every performance after the release of this album seems to be a way more stripped down version of the actual track. So yeah, I think they realized that they overdid it quite a lot with this album, and they fixed it, with future performances. Actually, the live version of Bloom, it's one of the most beautiful and touching Thom Yorke performances ever. I definitely recommend you to check that one out. So I'm gonna put this album in the C tier. I don't think it's a bad album. Honestly, I don't think it's a bad album, but I do think that many of the ideas that this record offers are so drowned in this fast-paced rhythms that you cannot distinguish the idea. Like, you can't make out the idea that they were trying to put out. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it in the C tier. I couldn't really put it in the D tier because it's not a bad album at all, but it's not that good either. So yeah, C tier it is. Now let's go with the final album, A Moonshade Pool. Now with this record, I think the band realized that they overdid it in the previous record. I think that they acknowledged their mistake and decided to do a more relaxing record, introducing elements of folk music and chamber pop music, and honestly, the result is one of the most beautiful Radiohead albums. That Thom Yorke's performance in this record is so thin and vulnerable. His falsetto sounds so good, especially in tracks like Daydreaming and Glass Eyes. I think it sounds beautiful. The lyrics and concepts about lost love in this album are so beautiful. For example, True Love Waits is one of the most touching performances Thom Yorke has ever done, and you also have a little flirty track with present tense, which it's my favorite track from the album. I think it works so well. The flow of the track, it's so pleasing, you know. And the tracks in this album are often colored by this little echoed and looped ad-libs that Thom Yorke puts on the tracks, like again present tense, that make this ghostly atmosphere play onto the track. I really like that about many of the songs in this album. And pretty much, I think that this album managed to capture that sound, that mysterious and atmospheric sound that the band had, and managed to perfect it. And honestly, the result is a beautiful record, the most beautiful Radiohead album, an album that I go back to very often because the replay value on this record, it's amazing. I think that the way that Thom Yorke performs this album is unique. You won't find Thom Yorke performing like this in any other Radiohead album, because he sounds way more vulnerable and mature in this record. Like, he uses falsetto way more, but with such technique and such an amazing skill that it's almost like a cry, and that works really well with the lyrical themes of the album. And that's the reason why I'm putting this album at the A tier. I think it's one of the best albums from the 2010s, and it's honestly, it goes to show how much of a great band Radiohead is. And you know, it doesn't matter how long it takes for the next Radiohead album. Believe me, I'll be the first one at the wait list to listen to that album, just because of A Moonshaped Pool, because they did such a beautiful job, and every single song on this album is great. So yeah, I think it's an A tier album, and a great way to close the discography if they never release another record, because tracks like Daydreaming, tracks like Glass Eyes, Present Tense, True Love Waits, and Burn the Witch are some of their best tracks. So yeah, honestly, I feel really good about this tier list. I feel like I did a really good job arranging these albums. Maybe I would put The King of Limbs a little bit higher, honestly, but I'm just gonna leave it at C tier because I think the album has a lot of flaws, but I definitely don't hate it as much as a lot of people do. So other than that, let me know if you would have done anything differently. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. I have a lot of fun doing these videos, and I definitely have even more fun when you guys interact, so I'll be really happy to see you guys comment and, you know, have a little chat over there in the comments section. With that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.